Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Erica Heald, your content chat host. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that I swear has come up in almost every conversation I've had with every marketer I've spoken to for at least the past year. And that is, of course, how is AI and the way that we're using it as marketers and as consumers, how is it changing how we should be creating our content so that way we're going to be able to be found once search results are more AI generated than Google search crawler generated. So for that, I have a special guest, Nick Nelson from Top Rank Marketing, who's been writing a lot on this topic lately. So I thought I would bring him on board so we could have a little chat about this. So Nick, welcome to Content Chat and take a moment to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Erica. It's an honor to be here. My name is Nick. I'm the Associate Content Director at Top Rank Marketing. I've been at the agency for almost 8 years, I think now. Started in 2017, so it's been quite a journey, but been a lot of fun. Love working there with the team and everything like that. We focus a lot on B2B and tech specifically. As you mentioned, AI and search, big topic at our agency for our clients and our industry. So definitely something we're really plugged into, learning about and exploring and understanding. So really looking forward to this chat. I think it's one of the existential topics in content marketing right now.
For reals. I mean, I feel like everybody spent so much time, so much focus thinking through, what are the keywords I want to rank for and how do I make sure I'm creating the best page on the internet for that topic? And then all of a sudden, people are finding that, first of all, the first page of Google results are almost entirely ads at this point. Your best content is going to be AI excerpted. So with this kind of context, how are you seeing search changing?
Well, I mean, click-through rates are not what they used to be. We know that, right? The data tells us that they're up, click-through rates are down up to 30% on average across a lot of industries because people are getting the information they need from the SERPs now a lot of the time with those featured snippets, those AI overviews. So it really does force us to kind of rethink what SEO is in our strategies. What is its goal? What does it accomplish? And how can we approach it in a way that we're getting value out of it, whether that's showing up in these AI results or, finding a way to circumnavigate and still get clicks to your site by creating different types of content or focusing on different topics.
And what I think is really fascinating is I'm seeing that I'm getting more branded searches, even though obviously as a sole proprietor, I'm not out there doing any kind of paid whatsoever, but a lot of the traffic coming to my site, at least per Google, so the people who actually click on the box saying, sure, you can track my information, which is, a very small percentage of folks, but a lot of them are searching for me. So are we seeing that sometimes those the SERPs and the AI summaries are actually getting people to search for us, like that people are not clicking through because they're not really getting that? Like, are we seeing more branded search?
Yeah, I mean, I think those AI overviews can do a great job of answering generalized queries. They can give you a lot of kind of generic type of information. But if people want that sort of specific point of view from a brand or they want to learn about a brand, I think that's something that you're not going to get from AI as a source. And people know that. And even if you are, people want to click through and see what the brand is all about by themselves. So that's definitely one of the adjustments that we've recommended is leaning a little more into that branded content, making sure you are controlling your narrative out there. And some of those mid-funnel topics that are a little more specific, a little more aligned to what you can speak on with a point of view that is, very distinct.
And I think previously, a lot of times brands would focus on trying to create SERPs that were pretty general, like, oh, we want to create, they wanted to get the placements for those SERPs that were general, like, what is content marketing is one of my favorite ridiculous kind of phrases that you think that, some folks are looking to try to own, and people would create a video and do a bunch of different things to try to really just sort of blast that page and see how many things they could actually get there. So what do you think is a better approach to actually, is there a way that we can use all those different elements that we were using before that people were using before to try to, really own a keyword to instead kind of own what makes you different in relation to that keyword?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And that's why branded searches, I think, are really valuable, because it sort of implies, right, that you're going to have a specific, unique point of view on something. I think, what you're talking about is a disconnect that I saw even before AI with a lot of SEO strategies, where it's like there's this thought that we have to rank for these big, high volume, high level keywords. Everyone wants to target what is digital transformation, but it's an impossibly competitive keyword that you're not going to rank for. So in that way, I think AI is kind of maybe helping push us a little bit towards what we should be doing, which is in some cases it's great to have that high level informational content on your site, but in many cases it's more valuable to get a little more specific and let AI overviews take care of some of that really generalized information that people can get there.
Well, I love that because frankly, getting any kind of a writing assignment to do one of those super high level, what is content strategy and why should you care pieces? It's so boring at this point when you've been doing this kind of work forever. So I'm at least excited that maybe it gives more opportunity for brands to lean into content that puts their customers first. Because it does feel like I'm seeing a lot more job listings and conversations happening around customer marketing.
Yeah. I think my outlook on AI in general is probably a little more positive and optimistic than a lot of people, at least like its current state. I don't know what it's going to turn into down the line, but I do think that it's like I said, it's raising the bar. I mean, there is just this endless pool of generic information out there now that people can create in a snap of a finger. So that's not going to cut it anymore. It's going to challenge us to really get outside of that generic bubble, maybe get away from this kind of approach to SEO where it's like, what's currently on the SERP and how can we sort of match that to rank. Instead, it's really about differentiating and finding new ways to give value that kind of stands out from everything that's out there. I think we'll talk about this as the conversation goes on, but a lot of the things that are being prioritized and focused on now are really about creating that human trust signal, which I guess is kind of ironic because we're trying to earn the trust of bots, but it's the same thing really, because, at the risk of being really obvious, like artificial intelligence by nature is designed to mimic humans. The content they create is meant to mimic human content. And, these search algorithms are meant to mimic human decision-making and evaluations of trust. So they're really evaluating things that humans would do a lot of the time. And for me as a B2B marketer who's trying to help brands build that trust, I think that's really exciting and creates a lot of opportunities.
As a content creator and strategist, I'm also very biased in favor of it being an opportunity because, no one is going to say, wow, we need more of this really bland, generic content. We got to be producing more of it every day. People are going to say, well, we need to be, expressing our brand voice. We need to show that there are humans involved with the content we create and with the work that we do at our company. Unless, of course, you're a company that has said that, you just want to replace everyone with AI instead of having open headcounts, which that's always really disturbing when you read that, especially when you've worked with that organization and you understand how people-centric it actually is for being a technology company. But I think it's maybe that part of it is they don't understand what generative search is like. And I know you actually wrote an entire blog post that I have shared with people before about, generative engine optimization. And I've been sharing it with folks who have been in that like sheer panic mode of we're not getting in traffic from Google anymore. And we're not ranking for any of our stuff. And they're starting to like have the full on meltdown. I've shared your posts recently because it does a great job of giving that overview. So I'm hoping you could kind of break it down for folks as to what it is and what it isn't.
Yeah, sure. So generative engine optimization, GEO, is the sort of the generative engine version of SEO. So it's really about optimizing to appear in these engines like ChatGPT, Perplexity, or even AI reviews in Google. And the big kind of core difference between GEO and traditional SEO is that, where there used to be a lot of focus on keyword usage, earning backlinks, technical structure of the content to match up to what these algorithms from search are crawling. GEO is really more about semantic relevance, the authority of the source, and structured data that is really easy for these large language models to run through and understand. So in some ways, it's not that different, I think, because I've always been a content quality first, above keyword stuffing or anything like that. But I think it really does push you to to think a little differently and to really try to put those signals at the forefront that are, this is credible content. It is from an authoritative source. It is from real people who know what they're talking about. Because what generative engines want, I mean, they're just synthesizers of information. So they're looking for good, original, unique information. And the more you can show that, the more you're going to be able to show up in them. And I think being AI visible in itself is not a huge draw for people all the time because it's hard to get clicks through these generative engines. We understand that, right? But I think what you learn at the end of the day, and with how like even SEO is evolving, is that they're going in the same direction and they're prioritizing the same things. So if you're optimizing around some of these principles like EEAT, which we'll talk about, you're just going to be setting yourself up for success wherever we go from here.
Well, you know, one of the things that I'm most excited about is since that emphasis is back on the credibility of the source, we're seeing more folks looking to actually credit writers who are writing things.
Yes.
So rather than hiring an expert to write something and then having no byline, or worse yet, because this is my pet peeve, when it's your brand name team, it's like your brand name or your brand name team did not write whatever the thing is. It's like a human being wrote that content, and you're going to judge how valid it is, how useful, how unique, whether or not you should pay attention based on having that name and, you know, maybe even a little smiley photo next to it. So that way you're like, oh, hey, I know that person and they know their stuff. I want to read this article. Because it's been one of my pet peeves for so long at this point when brands do that, especially I think blog content is where you'll most frequently see that. So that I think is really positive. And maybe it'll also cause people to keep somebody's name on things when they leave. Because I mean, we see that a lot too, right? Somebody leaves the organization, or just the organization gets a new CMS, and all of the content that's written by anyone who's not still there, it gets whitewashed. They don't actually update any of that content. So it's still that person's anecdotes and experience, but all of a sudden it has like a wrong name or no name. So
yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is really a key topic of EEAT, I think, and it's something that like it's a great example of what I'm talking about with like machine sort of evaluations of trust matching humans. Because if you have a author named on a page, you can click on their name, you can see a bio that has information about their expertise and their credentials and maybe their LinkedIn. You can see that this is a real person. You can verify for yourself if they know what they're talking about, and you know, Google and AI are able to do that at hyperspeed now. So yeah, like you said, I mean, I think that is a big challenge that a lot of brands have that we run into is, you know, we like to use these generic bylines, you know, this authored by company, but that really doesn't cut it anymore. So you just kind of, I understand the trepidation about using people's names because employees leave and things like that. But, you know, I don't think people need to run away from the fact that employees leave companies, you know, and that something might've been written by someone who's not there anymore, as long as it wasn't a tumultuous breakup or something like that. So
the person did not end up in jail.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's a key one. And I agree, you know, I mean, I'm a creators deserve credit kind of person, and I love seeing bylines on posts. It's certainly for me, you know, regardless of AI, it gives me that instant jolt of credibility when I'm reading something.
Totally. Do you have any other tips for some ways that brands who are realizing that they have maybe gone too far in the realm of, you know, really just having been focused on old school SEO and wanting to kind of evaluate current content to see, you know, what they can do in addition to, you know, adding those robust kind of like author bylines, author bios and all that kind of good stuff. And incidentally, I was recently approached by a client I wrote something for like a year ago, and they asked me for a bio because they 100% are optimizing all of their content for generative, and they wanted to make sure that they had that really good information at the end that said why anyone should read that piece and, you know, listen to me. So I'm wondering what some of your other tips might be.
Yeah. You know, I think one big thing that we sort of encourage is to think less about keywords and more in terms of topics. And, you know, you can still evaluate demand through keyword volume and stuff like that, but really moving more towards a topical approach. Cause I mean, that's how the human mind works. Keyword is very search engine centric, right? So that's a big one, and sort of mapping out topics and how they relate to each other, and really creating great experiences within your site so that users can flow through, they can find related information, they can maybe move down funnel from coming in with like more of an informational query to more of a how-to or solution-focused query. Obviously, anytime you get anyone into your website now, it's a big deal. It's harder to do. So you want to really create those great experiences and sort of cohesive opportunities for them to move around. Another big one that I talk about is just bringing expertise forth in very clear ways. Our agency is really big on influencer marketing in B2B. That's been sort of one of our pioneering disciplines. And I think influencer marketing is going to be so essential now, being able to co-opt the credibility of people who already have built up this authority, who are recognizable names. And that can be people in your company or outside of it, people you partner with. But that's going to be huge. Partnerships with other companies so you can sort of share your knowledge and authority that you might have in specific areas, I think is going to be great. Another one is bringing forth real life experience. I mean, experience is a big part of that EEAT framework. Sharing anecdotes that are relatable. I mean, here's something we experienced that exemplifies this topic in real life. Here's a campaign we worked on and how we overcame a challenge. Again, these are the things that AI cannot replicate because they don't have these experiences. They're not doing these things in real life. So those are a few things that I really tend to focus on when I'm thinking about how we can align to a AI GEO future.
Well, we had a question come in, well, kind of a comment that I think is also a question we can address, which is, can we use markup, schema, some of the meta information that is on the page to make some of those connections for the generative AI search?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, schema markup and structured data is huge. I mean, that's how a lot of these connections are made and a lot of these assessments are made sort of behind the scenes. So, that's a little bit more of a technical SEO aspect that my guy, Ryan, our director of search, specializes in, but I know how important he considers it and how much he's optimizing around those kind of things when we're working on content.
Before we dive into EAT, I also did want to ask if you have any tools or frameworks that you can recommend to folks who are either just getting started thinking this through or who need to sell somebody else in their organization on doing it. Because I know, especially, in some organizations, they can get really, really tied into the old way of doing things. And I can imagine that in some situations, people might be a little reluctant to try something new, which this definitely feels like it's going in a different direction than traditional SEO.
Yeah. I mean, I think just equip yourself with as much relevant, timely information that you can. You just want to create a clear understanding of what's going on, what the opportunities are, and what the roadblocks are, and where things are headed. This is changing every day. So it can be tough to stay up to speed, but it's worth doing. I think I saw just last week, I think Google came out and finally officially said that they're penalizing AI generated content results, which was always more implicit, but always sort of known. So these kind of things, I mean, if you're explaining that to your leadership, if you're not visible in search, your company's in trouble, and everyone kind of understands that, and search is changing. So having the data, having the understanding of what are the new benchmarks, people see that organic traffic is down and like, oh, SEO is failing us. And it's like, no, it's just different. But people are still using Google a billion times a day. It's still far, far more used than these generative engines. I mean, if you look at some of these stats, I think it's kind of, people have an exaggerated idea of how far along we are in terms of leaning into that. But it is going to continue to be a thing. And like I said, I think when you make the point that this isn't requiring wholesale changes to how we approach things. It isn't requiring some wild strategies where we have to implement all these technical things. It's really just about creating the kind of content that you should, which is relevant, human first, helpful, valuable, and sort of uniquely demonstrating your expertise.
I have two things that I can recommend that are, I think, really, really kind of good first things to do if you know that you're going to have a conversation with somebody that might be a little reluctant in this area, reluctant to change. First, I love if you could go to, if you use Perplexity and you ask it, what is whoever your primary internal SME or thought leader is, and you say, what is that person known for? And then you take a picture of the results, because Perplexity, unlike some of these other tools, actually will show you the sources that it's drawn from in order to come to the conclusion and to give you that response. So that way you can make the case to your internal stakeholders around how you need to have all these different kinds of all the different kinds of content, all these different sources, and how they all have to be saying the same things in order to get the results you want. And then going into ChatGPT and saying, what is XYZ brand known for? And, then having that conversation, because I think once you can show what's out there currently, and, it may or may not be how you want to be coming across as a brand. And if it isn't, when you can show them that, I think that can be a really, an easy and free, and, it's always fun when it's free, but an easy and free way to kind of make that point real for people.
Yeah, great point. I mean, I think one of the scary things about AI search is maybe a feeling that you're losing control of the narrative. That AI is going to be serving up information about your brand or about the really critical topics for your brand that is not what you want. And I think that, as you said, kind of how do you build momentum to get people on board? That's a big one. I mean, that's one that's going to be a top concern for people that are leading a company. And that's a huge reason to be trying to show up in these AI searches, is so you have some control over that narrative. It used to be that if someone was ranking at the top with information you didn't like, you could just create great content and outrank them, but you're not going to outrank the AI overviews. So you got to kind of play along with them.
It's just sort of like back in the day when people said, oh, we think social media is just a fad. We're not going to actually engage with folks on platforms like Twitter. What everyone found out real quickly is it doesn't matter if your brand wants to engage with folks. If they want to talk about you, they'll be talking about you. So it's in your best interest to be there. You don't get to opt out. Unfortunately.
It's a great comparison. Yeah.
So let's dive into EAT. So EAT is an acronym. So I'm going to have you define it and talk about, what it is and how it can be a really good philosophy to take when planning and creating content that actually can work for both, search, for both traditional search and for generative search.
Yeah, definitely. So EEAT stands for Experience, Expertise, Authority, and Trust. And it is the quality rater guidelines that Google uses in order to basically evaluate their search results to make sure that they're high quality and people first. And I think that's really great because it's giving us, Google is giving us basically the guidelines to follow if you want to be showing up and creating content that is high quality in their eyes. And in addition to, I think I hinted at this before, but in addition to helping you rank for search, it's just going to help you build trust with your audience and get the points across effectively that you want to, because it's meant to mimic that human trust assigning sort of process. So when you look at experience, the big question you want to ask yourself about content is, does this person have experience? Have they walked the walk in this area? Do they know what they're talking about? So, you can evaluate that things with, like I said, like anecdotes, evidence of things, stories that you share, I think that sort of help illustrate, your credibility on a certain topic. Those are really valuable. Showing your track record. I mean, a lot of experience and really a lot of EEAT. And this is another thing that differentiates it from traditional SEO a lot, I think, is that it's not just the page in question that's being evaluated, right? It is your whole domain. It is your whole digital presence. I mean, these are accounting for your social media. This is the things you talk about everywhere. So it's not anything you can game. You can't stuff keywords to try to make someone think this. You really have to walk the walk. And that's why we think it's so important to be sort of broad and yet focused within your area and make sure you're covering it all, showing that you've talked about this from a lot of different angles. And can really cover every aspect of it to give people that confidence. Expertise is kind of similar, but it's more, is this person really an expert in their area? Do they talk about this topic a lot? Do they bring unique insights? I think one big thing that is great for EEAT, and I think we see a lot more brands leaning into, we're seeing a lot more interest in this from clients and prospects, is original research. You want to be that originally cited source. That's huge for generative engine optimization, because if everyone's just citing the same data, then there's no difference really. But that's why original research.
Old data too.
Yes. Oh gosh, yes. So original research and these unique insights that you're able to pull out, it's going to get you backlinks. It's going to get you into generative engines. And it's going to, show your audience like you are a first-party source of information. I think that's really key. Of course, author bios with regards to expertise, also very key, because people can verify who's talking about this. They know what they're talking about, etc. Authority, again, is very much a domain-based thing, I think, but are you viewed as authoritative by the industry, by the world? So really looking at a lot of things like credentials, awards, make sure you're putting those on your site. Don't worry about being self-serving. These are things that people and engines want to see so they can evaluate you. Things like backlinks are great for this. Are you getting linked to by, people who are authoritative or sources that are authoritative out there? And that's another huge benefit of original resource. I think it really contributes to that signal. And then trust.
As an aside, Michelle Lin, who is an amazing person when it comes to creating proprietary research. She is the person who was really the driving force between the Marketing Profs and Content Marketing Institute annual research when she was working with them for nearly a decade. She's going to be my guest next week. So we'll be doing a lot of chatting about proprietary research.
That's awesome. Yeah. Content Marketing Institute and Marketing Profs. I mean, that's one of the standards right there. We do our B2B marketing influencer marketing report every year. It's awesome. It's one of our best assets that we create. So I can't recommend that highly enough. And then trust as a part of that EEAT framework is really the culmination of everything. I know Google says basically, if you don't have this, none of the rest matter. You just have to have a trusting signal that you're sending out. So that's really how it all comes together in sending those human signals. And also showing, its user signals too. Do people engage with your content? Do they jump off the page right away? Those things are still evaluated very heavily, just user behavior and what they're telling you.
And a lot of it's about context. So like you may have a wonderful, really well-intentioned content strategy, but if the other content on your website or other adjacent websites that you manage are telling a very different story, then you're going to end up with that content not performing as well. And while that may make people cranky, on the flip side, it's more accurate. That comes to mind because, of course, when I did a lot of work with the Sierra Club, one of the topics that came up frequently was greenwashing, because there were frequently brands that were trying to build, awareness around all sorts of sustainability and eco-friendly topics and be seen as an expert in those areas. Yet in reality, what they were actually doing, where they made their money as a business, conflicted with that. And it was something that would come up a lot in some of the content we would be creating. So I feel like now it's no longer that you're worried that those kinds of mismatches or disconnects are going to turn up on social. Now you have to worry that, generative AI is going to actually look at the context in a way that search never did before.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the big things that I try to get across is, don't just be thinking about these guidelines and principles when you're creating new content to put out there. Really, a lot of these companies should be scrutinizing their existing content library. If, like you said, if there's inconsistent information across your content ecosystem, that's something that's going to not help you. If you have a lot of outdated information, especially on like timely topics, that's not going to help you. So really, I think refreshing content, especially things that are, like a trends post from like several years ago, whip that thing into shape. Yeah. I mean, and that can be a lot lower lift than creating new content too, which is the upside of it. But really, you want to make sure your content ecosystem is working for you in all ways. So evaluate that content, kind of try to flag those pieces that are highly important and might be dated or giving information that's not exactly consistent with what you're saying now. Because it is really one of the big shifts, I think, in thinking about generative engines and AI is this domain-wide sort of view, as opposed to just thinking about things as a single piece of content.
100%. And that to me is awesome. As a content strategist, that's the dream, because when I'm really biased because, again, tomorrow I'm kicking off two big, website projects where in both cases they're rebranding. And, I'm going to be personally rewriting 30 plus, really core pages on the site to set the tone, to help people understand what that new brand voice is. And then lots of other people will be using our guidelines and using those examples. But it's like, if those examples and those pages don't trickle down appropriately, then they're not going to do their job. So it is, to me, it's just really fascinating. And, hopefully it will just have people be looking at things more holistically instead of looking at each page as, an island, which, is not a great user experience either.
For sure. Yeah, I think migrations and rebrands are a really kind of critical point in this discussion because they need to be handled very carefully, right? But they do create an opportunity to rethink maybe your site navigation. That's a big thing that we haven't touched on yet, but making it easy for people to find their way around, really
Yeah.
intuitive. Make sure that they're able to find your most high value pages through internal linking and through your nav bar structure very easily. That's a really key thing as well, for sure.
And just, I love the idea of making it so that if you have very different audiences that you serve, making it easy for them to find their way to their own hub for information. Because it's horrible when you end up on a site that you know does serve you as an individual, but you're not their primary audience. Their website was not written for you, and you're trying desperately to find that the kernel of information that you know is there somewhere. That's literally the worst. So I'm hopeful that people will understand how important it is that if you do serve an audience, you've got to find a way to make that be clear and obvious if you want to actually still stand out with generative AI.
Yeah, I think the flip side of that too is being able to filter out the people who are not your audience. Make it clear to the people who you're not for that you're not for them, because it's not worth your time to be engaging with them necessarily from a business standpoint. So,
Yep.
I'm big on quality over quantity and just kind of drawing those lines very clearly so you can make sure you're bringing in those qualified audiences and engaging them on your site.
And maybe that's a B2B thing. Maybe once you've been doing B2B content for long enough, you do start to see that value on how important it is to, really be that one source for that perfect ideal customer versus trying to get, as many people into that funnel, which was the old way of thinking, got to get lots of top of the funnle content out there, get lots of people to sign up for our emails.
So much search volume. Yeah, no, totally. 100%.
Have you had any projects, you don't have to name people, but have you had any projects that you think have really done a good job of thinking from this standpoint when kind of reevaluating their content hub?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of migrations and we've really been helping a lot of clients adopt the content hub model, sort of the resource center model, because I think it's just a great way to create content for the current environment, really sort of focused, interrelated content that is easy to navigate and jump around to. It demonstrates that topical authority really well and really clearly. So the big things that I see that are maybe missteps are a lot of it is just the nav. Things, the navigation is just not built in an intuitive way, and it really does a disservice to a lot of the content. It's hard to find a lot of the stuff that is good and really helpful to the audience. One thing that we talked about is no author bylines, the generic company byline. That's going to do a disservice, I think there's maybe a tendency to want to do that more with like resource content versus blog content, but I still think having a byline, or at the very least having, quotes from the subject matter experts in your company very intertwined into the content is really key for getting across that perspective, that point of view, and the unique expertise that you're bringing. And focus, just making sure you're very focused and you're being very thoughtful about which topics you're tackling, and then going all in on them once you do. Don't just scratch the surface. So everyone's resources are stretched. Everyone's trying to do more with less, and I think we really need to scrutinize what topics we're choosing to pursue, what signals we're using to sort of make those decisions, and how we're going about creating the content in a way that's going to be differentiated and deliver results.
I think we have to not be afraid to let go of some of those pages that drive lots of, unqualified content that's never going to convert.
Yeah, I'll give an example from the TRM site. Like our top traffic driver forever has been this page from 2013 on our blog. It was like a what is content, and it was like literally, and it was a bunch of definitions from like all these different people. So it was very kind of EEAT friendly, honestly. But it's like, it's a high traffic thing. Like a lot of people search that, and if you're the top result, you'll get a lot of clicks. But was that qualified traffic? Not really. So. Yeah, I think a lot of companies have these pages that are like, oh, that's every month in the results. That's one of our big traffic drivers. But is that traffic meaningful? Does it matter really at all to your business? If not, then what's the point, really?
Yep. Have had many a pitched battle with usually with IT teams who are like, we can't take the hit to our amount to our traffic. We can't do it, Erica. And I'm like, but that traffic is just non-converting traffic. Wouldn't you rather have a higher conversion rate?
100%. And that's In this age of declining organic traffic, I mean, almost every single one of our client programs and ourselves, I mean, everyone is seeing declining organic traffic across the board as a result of what's happening. So does that mean you should stop pursuing organic traffic? No, it just means you should be making sure that what you're trying to bring in is you can feel confident that you're bringing in the right people and that you can drive them to take action.
Because for all we know, having that one page being the biggest traffic driver on your site could actually be sending really negative, negative information to AI. We have no idea how AI thinks about the fact that, oh, you have this one very popular page and none of the rest of your content is that good. Does it mean that it's going to start thinking that you are whatever that page is, that that's the most important thing about your company?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great way to look at it. Like organic traffic, even in some cases, is not even that much of a good thing if you're bringing in and around irrelevant terms.
Exactly. So what is the best way to kind of structure and get started with doing a content audit that really can help you look at whether or not you're applying these EAT principles to the content that you're creating? And if not, what is actually worth updating versus archiving?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are various different ways you can sort of assess and audit your website's EEAT standing. There are very systematic ways to do it. Our agency has a proprietary scorecard that we can create that evaluates all these things in very specific details, gives you a score, gives you your opportunities of things you can do. It's something you can do kind of manually too. I mean, you can look up these parameters. Our blog post has a lot of these parameters, and you can say, do we have author bios? Do we have terms of services on our site? Do we have an about us page that has the company's address? I mean, there are a lot of boxes you can just check to send some of these signals. But a lot of it really too is very qualitative, right? I mean, it's the way you're pursuing the production of content. So we like to have checklists for that as well. Certain things that we're making sure that we're including and that these principles are coming across, because you just can't risk being generic as we mentioned today. So I highly recommend, whatever way you go about it, to take some steps to see what your EEAT standing is. How is Google viewing you through this lens? Because if Google and the bots don't view your site as trustworthy, people probably won't either. And as we know, in B2B and in all business, trust, I mean, is key to everything. It's tough to close deals right now. It's tough there's not a lot of demand because of the market in a lot of industries. So you really got to be thoughtful on being resonant and making an impact. It's the stakes are high.
And making promises you can keep, because
yes,
we have very long memories in B2B. We always remember, much like Pepperidge Farm remembers. Sorry, could not
Very
resist
good. It's
that.
a good throwback there.
What do you think are some of the big red flags that you've uncovered for folks when you've done this kind of an audit that have shown, hey, this is like a really common thing that folks, should be able to quickly address, but that frequently you're finding in some of this content that you're auditing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is structural. There'll just be kind of things that are missing in sort of the site's makeup that are relatively easy to address. There are some technical aspects of it, like I mentioned, like terms of service. Author schema is something. We talked about schema markups. Author schema is something that helps get that information across in a way that is easy for the generative engines and search engines to assess. I think a lot of it comes from like these big overburdened or overwhelming sort of content libraries that like maybe larger or legacy brands have, where they have a bunch of redundant, duplicative content, big gaps that are not addressed that people are searching for, because you want to have that comprehensive coverage of a topic. You want to build that topical authority. Getting those authoritative backlinks and sort of connections to other industry sources, influencers, and stuff like that, super valuable to bring in those trust signals and those credibility signals and compound what your brand is doing. I think maybe for like a smaller, newer company, this is even more important to kind of build that momentum and get your name out there. So don't try to let the content do it all on its own. Make sure you're thinking about your social channels and all the signals that your brand is sending, and that you have a very consistent message, consistent focus. You're engaged with your audience, you're reachable, you're responsive, because it's just all about bringing forward this personal touch, this relationship, differentiating. And I think another thing is just being creative and adding some emotion. That's another thing that's such a huge differentiator from anything that AI is going to create is being able to infuse maybe like a pop culture or an interest or a hobby that you have or something like that.
And I think that's something that B2B, brands really have to work on, because for every marketing profs out there that has a real, strong B2B brand that's very human, very relatable, very fun, you still do have many brands where they're kind of afraid to have a personality, and they're afraid to address some of those gaps. Like they'll have a question that everyone's searching for or everyone's asking, but because they don't want to give the answer because it's something that it's either not on the roadmap, it's not prioritized as something that's going to happen, or what have you, they don't want to address it, even though by not addressing it, to your point, it creates this kind of this void that generative AI search is going to 100% read things into.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be flexible and you got to be agile, right? I think if you're an international tax software, this might not have been on your radar 6 months ago, but now you better be talking about tariffs and how that's affecting your business, right? I mean, the state of the world is changing fast, and you've got to be able to address things as they come. You have to be very timely. I think one thing that's underrated, honestly, is being able to show up in like Google News or Google Discover results by really hitting on very timely topics. That's been a big success that I've seen for a lot of websites, including some that I take part in on the side. That's a great way to show up that gets overlooked. And it's another thing that AI can't match because they're not plugged into current events. I mean, even as it gets a little more less outdated in all of its responses, it's not real time like brands can be. So, and as an agency, as a lot of companies, that's one of the most valuable things you can provide your audience and your customers is staying plugged in, giving them that information, knowing that they can be confident that they are not falling behind because they have you as a resource.
Well, since you and I are both baseball fans, although I support the San Francisco Giants, thank you kindly.
Love the Giants.
So I'm a big Giants fan. I know that you, in one of your side projects, is baseball related, and I think it's a good example of doing a lot of this right. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, big baseball fan, as you can probably tell. I got my ballpark map here where I check off all the ones I've been to. The Giants Stadium, as of last summer, is on that list. I had a great time there. Beautiful ballpark there on the ocean. And yeah, so I'm a big Minnesota Twins fan, have been for a long time. When I was in college 20 years ago, I started a blog back when blogs were still pretty new. And it was sort of a way to try to fill the gap in what was absent from mainstream coverage, I felt like at the time, which was very kind of shallow and limited. And then 7 years after launching that, I came together with some other Twins bloggers, and we launched a site called twinsdaily.com, which is now had been around amazingly for 13 years. And it's become, one of the largest independent sports sites on the web. And it's an SEO powerhouse, honestly. And I'd say that not to brag, because I don't feel like I've taken that big of a part in it, but just playing my role and watching the site grow. It's been interesting to watch. And I think there are a lot of great takeaways about, how to show up in search and what Google values. Our site did almost 2 million visits last year, and over 50% of those were from organic search. So, it's the way I see us show up in rankings and as quickly as we do, it blows my mind. And I think when I think about why that's happening and sort of what the lessons that could be taken away for brands, one thing is that just in the name of our site and our brand, it's very straightforward what we do, right? A lot of baseball blogs will have, some sort of little play on words, like a Giants blog might be into the Bay or something like that. But we're just straightforward. We're a Twins site and we publish content daily. I think that consistency of publishing daily, that people know when they come to our site, they're going to get fresh content. That's huge. That's a great lesson for people to take away. Obviously, there's a lot of authenticity in the fact that this is a community-driven fan site. We have the bloggers that have been writing about the team for a long time, but we welcome anyone to come write their own blogs. When they do a good job, we graduate them to our front page. So there's sort of this hierarchy of quality. It's very forum-driven, so there's a lot of conversation happening. You can find other people and have these discussions. And I think all of these things kind of come together to really create a very human, community-driven site. And that's just such a valuable thing that I learned. And we all have this sort of shared passion and interest, which is true of marketing in almost any industry. There are going to be these pockets of shared interests. Maybe not something where there's as much stuff to talk about every day as a baseball team that plays every day, but you can always find good trends and challenges and pain points and opportunities that are really interesting and worth sharing. So, I look at a lot of things about the experience of working on that site and seeing how well it's done. Also, just the variety of different types of content. I think maybe it's not something we've necessarily touched on yet, but the old standard 800-word blog post, text-only blog post, kind of losing its standing, I think, as the atomic unit of content. So interactive, video content, infographics, creating all these different types of ways to consume and discover content is super helpful. So I think, clarity, focus, the combination of focus and depth as well. We got a lot of twins obsessed people who are talking about the minor leagues to an extent that no one else is. So when you can get to that level with your subject matter where you're covering it in a way that very few others are, I think that's really huge too. All these things just differentiate you from basically any other source in the eyes of search engines or generative engines or just people.
And for me, what I heard from you here and saw on the site is it's really about creating content that helps drive conversations and build human connection between
Yes.
people. Because the more that we use technology, the more that we are working alone instead of being in, an office or going into a city center, all these things, humans want to have connection, which if you are an avid baseball fan, because of all the crazy fan sites you participate in. And it's the same with gaming. I've been playing World of Warcraft for 20 years, and the fan community around that game is insane. And there's so much great content all the time. So while, you're trying to sell something as a brand, that doesn't mean, though, that you can't learn from these other kinds of sites with this content that is, so engaging, because you are competing for people's attention against that content. So while you might not be as fun as, coming up with better ideas for a City Connect jersey than apparently the people who actually create City Connect jerseys for these poor ball teams. Maybe you can't have something quite that fun if you're selling some sort of B2B widget, but you can learn from that to think, well, what are things that people get really heated about or that people always poke fun at, and create some content around that to build that sense of shared community and, that awareness that you really see the people that you're trying to connect with your content. So.
Yeah. And I recommend, it is hard, especially in a lot of industries, to infuse that kind of aspect into B2B marketing, but people are waking up to it, right? I mean, there's been this drumbeat forever of we need more emotion, we need more human connection, and it never quite seemed to take hold. It seems like now we kind of really are starting to see that. There are a lot of great examples of like really interesting, emotionally driven B2B marketing out there. I think as you see, especially as you start seeing B2B companies advertising more on these channels like connected TV or even standard over the top TV, you're not really going to get people's attention if you're just doing dry, demos for your product. You need to have interesting, engaging creative. So if you're someone who kind of struggles to come up with ideas, I highly recommend just kind of perusing a few of these and letting yourself get inspired by what people are doing, because even in the driest of niches, there's always an opportunity to really create something interesting and more engaging emotionally.
100% with you on that.
Yeah.
So we have a little bit over 10 minutes left. So I'm going to ask you to pull out your crystal ball because, that's always fun. And I'd love to hear, what your thoughts are around what we can expect to see more of in the near future when it comes to AI-driven search, and just maybe some ideas for how brands can maybe adjust their content strategy midstream in order to be a little bit more flexible. Because, we've all had time now to evaluate our Q1 results. And I think a lot of folks are probably a little surprised at seeing, where traffic went and what engagement was looking like. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest, most immediate step I would recommend is reevaluate your benchmarks. Stop comparing your organic traffic baseline to whatever it was 2 years ago, because it's irrelevant. I think I do believe, if we're talking about how things might change a little going forward, I think there will be a little more focus from these generative engines and Google on sending people through to publishers and websites. It might pull back a little bit from where it's been going, because I mean, Google as a business recognizes that they need to be sending people to websites in order to have a business, basically, right? They can't just be pulling everyone to their own properties as much as they might like to. And I think even some of these generative engines, you mentioned Perplexity, that's one that I like a lot more because you can see the sources and click through to them, as opposed to a lot of this chat GPT stuff is hard to trust because it's just, where'd that come from, and people are going to get a little burnout with that, I think. I mean, maybe people already are with some of these AI results and some of the inaccuracies. I just saw a stat the other day that there's still such a high percentage of inaccurate information in AI results. And that's a little scary. So I think sourcing will kind of rise to the forefront a little bit, which will be a good thing for brands. But the best thing you can do if you want to position yourself to succeed going forward is really dial in those EEAT principles. Pull yourself away from the idea of like high volume keywords being the be all end all, and think about topics and relevance and the sort of actions that you can drive. Can you engage people on your site with this? Can you be more, actionable rather than just informative? Can you show someone how to do something in a way that they really benefit from, as opposed to just getting a dictionary definition of something, or, a genericized page that's built to rank compared to what else is on the SERP? That's just not really going to get you anywhere anymore. You got to be original. You got to be unique. And that's why I think, first party expertise or influencers coming through in your content, original research and data that is unique. Even if it's like, this is something we see with our customers as a generalized aggregate. That is such a unique, valuable piece of real world data that people can use that only you have, right? So start thinking about those things that you can offer that no one else can from an informational standpoint. Lean into those mid-funnel kind of terms. So you can really bring people in who have a little more intent, maybe already into that thing, and you can kind of show how your solutions do things as opposed to just how things work, is really valuable. Branded searches, as you mentioned. And above all, just celebrate your creators, put them at the forefront, because it's the people at your company who more than ever are going to elevate it. Or if you're not putting them on the pedestal, you're going to fall behind.
And your customers, same thing. Because if you are doing a great job at delivering whatever it is, whatever your product or service is, your customers want you to stay in business. Yes. They do not want to have to onboard a new solution for whatever it is that you do. So if you're doing an amazing job and you reach out to them in a, engaging, respectful manner and say, hey, can we fly you to some fun destination and have you be our guest at this conference, so that way we can also, interview you on camera for this thing, you can usually get people to say yes, or they're like, hey, I'm already going there. And if they love you, they are thrilled to tell other people why they love you, because again, they don't want to have to switch service providers or manufacturers either. So, build those relationships with the content, but then bring those relationships into the content that you're creating too. Because what a better way to show trust than to show a real, business person who, has that trusting relationship with you and thinks that you're amazing.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, case studies, testimonials, customer stories, all these things are more valuable than ever. I know they can be hard to source and create at times because there tend to be a lot of hurdles, but it's really worth focusing on making it happen wherever you can, whether it's, flying someone out, reaching out to a client, even just nice things that people say on social media, asking if you can use some of those. That goes a long way. That's social proof. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because we haven't really touched on it yet. But to your point, even though it can be hard sometimes, if you're doing a good job and you're doing right by your customers, they'll want to help you.
Yeah. And it just starts with saying, thank you for that feedback. That's so great. And you just do one small ask that becomes a bigger ask. And over time, then they start to view you as a partner and not just as a broker for some sort of a commodity. And that's, that's the dream, right?
Exactly. And that's one thing I tell people about case studies is, I think a lot of, especially big companies, they can get bogged down in like approvals. The customer didn't like the way we said one thing, so it made us look bad, so we got to scrap all this work we did. I'm a big fan of like making it much more of like a celebration of the customer. Like, look what they achieved, and we helped them. But look at their great strategy, look at their great talent, because then it becomes like a co-marketing asset. Basically, It's a great thing for them to use. So that's something I'm huge on is solving the old problems with case studies. But that, of course, is probably an episode topic of its own.
We'll have to come back to that later, because I love talking about case studies.
I'm down. Me too.
Well, Nick, it's been such a joy to spend my lunch hour with you today, talking about generative AI and its impact on search. When we post the recap for this, I will be including links to some of the posts that you've written on the Top Rank blog. But I'd love for you to give a plug for where people can see more of your writing and connect with you to learn more about what you're doing.
Cool. Thank you. Again, it's Nick Nelson, Associate Content Director at Top Rank Marketing. You can always find, I write a lot for our blog. So, toprankmarketing.com/blog. We're publishing multiple times a week on a lot of topics that are, pretty similar to some of the stuff we've been discussing here today. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Just search for Nick Nelson, Top Rank, and I'm on Twitter or X or whatever at Nick Nelson MN. So obviously I love talking content. I love talking, all things AI. I think it's all really fascinating. So if you're interested in any of this, reach out and let's chat.
Well, thanks again for being our guest. And everyone, will be back next week with Michelle Lynn talking about proprietary research. Take care, everybody.